Thank you for the click. My name is Luxeley, and on the day before tomorrow, the Tides of Vengeance, also known as Patch 8.1 or Aquaman 2, the sequel, this patch is bringing a hell of a lot of love for Shadow Priest. Now, I have not been this pumped up and excited about Shadow Priest on the PvP side of the game since the WoD beta. Now, putting things on a timeline, this spins the clock back about 4 years ago. Yes, Shadow Priests were interesting in Legion. They were viable. They were pretty good. But the reality is, from a subjective point of view, my point of view, the way I played it, I just didn't find it quite as fun. Let me know if you found it fun, if you found it viable in Legion. But nothing but love and joy is coming your way today. Rather than hanging around the shadows and just accepting what you can't do as a Shadow Priest in PvP, soon you'll be doing some very unacceptable things in PvP. Make melee reach for tissues and cry, and they're going to end up brushing up on their typing skills so they can bitch and complain on the forums. Get ready for some good news. First, we're going to discuss the changes to a few baseline spells. Then we're going to get into the talents, then we're going to get into the PvP talents. At the end of the video, I'm going to provide a little bit of insight into what it all means from a PvP perspective. Make sure you're subscribed so you'll be notified when I upload an extremely detailed and comprehensive Shadow Priest guide for patch 8.1. Better yet, YouTube doesn't always feel like doing their job, so if you really want to get a piece of that guide, follow me on Twitter. 100% sure you'll be notified because I'll be sending out the notification when the guide is finished and uploaded. Baseline Dispersion reduces all damage taken by 75%, which is up from 60%, but that's not all. You're still immune to all movement impairing effects, and your movement speed is increased by 50%. In the words of Led Zeppelin, the song remains the same. Dispersion is castable while silenced, stunned, and feared, and Void Form's Insanity Drain is temporarily reduced by 100% while in Dispersion. So some very good defensive changes to Dispersion, and there are some new talents that are going to make it stronger, so we'll get into that in a few. Mindseer receives a small buff, dealing 21.8% spell power and damage, up from 18.1%. Plus, if you stack up on the Azerite armor ability Shearing Dialogue, that increases your Mindseer's damage to targets with Shadow Word Pain. You're going to get quite a bit more leverage with this change. Plus, in patch 8.1, Shearing Dialogue will apply a 30% snare to all targets hit with Shadow Word Pain. Ouch. Painful stuff. It's going to be great in BGs, especially BGs where you're capturing the flag. You could hit up you could stop people up and then hit mind shear and get a snare on a group of people. It's an AoE snare, and it's pretty nice gift under the Christmas tree. Power Word Shield receives a little bit of a nerf. You're not going to be able to pop Power Word Shield on the same target for 6 seconds, which is essentially the cooldown. I tried it on the PTR, and you can still shield yourself every 6 seconds, but I haven't tried it in PvP combat. And I'm kind of thinking that the Forsaken Soul debuff is going to take effect, and it just hasn't hit the PTR. Could be wrong, but we'll find out soon. But this is just a very slight nerf, but I want to be thorough. That's why I mentioned it. Shadow Form still increases your spell damage by 10%, but no longer reduces the physical damage taken by 10%. Believe it or not, I'm very okay with that change because the real good news is coming soon. Void Bolt now generates 20 Insanity, which is up from 16 Insanity. So nice change there on an instant spell that you're going to be using while you're in Void Form. Speaking of Void Form, increases your spell damage by 20%, which is up from a very laughable 10%. Everybody has a buff in the game of 15, most of which short-term buffs are 20%. Why Blizzard dropped Shadow down to 10% in Void Form? I get it. You go in and out of Void Form a lot, but the reality is it's really not justified, and 20% is a nice buff. Still grants 5% haste every 1 second and reduces the cooldown of Mind Blast by 1.5 seconds. Hallucinations used to be a PvP talent. It's now baseline. All of your successful magic dispels Mass Dispel, Purify Disease, Vampiric's Embrace, and Power Word Shield cast generate 6 Insanity. So this is going to help you have a little bit of uptime generating Insanity while you're using utility that are going to benefit the group as a whole. This is a nice change. It's a very subtle change. It's kind of an underrated change. And I think it's giving Shadow a lot of leverage because there's nothing like being able to use utility and gain a little bit of power while you're doing it. And that is very, very interesting, creative, and welcome change. Focus Will is a new Shadow baseline ability. Melee attacks against you cause you to gain Focus Will, reducing damage taken by 15%. The big question here, does it stack 2 times like it does for Disc and Holy? I believe that might change on the disc side, but the reality is it's still a good question. Wowhead says it will stack for Shadow Priest, which means up to a 30% damage reduction, but the PTR tooltip says it does not. But even at 15%, it's 5% more, and the reality is you kind of lost that 10% damage reduction when you went into Void form. Now you're not going to lose it with Focused Will. So whether it's going to be stacking to 30% or just 15%, this is a welcome change. This is a very good change. Moving on to the talents. There's going to be a new talent, Intangibility. Dispersion heals you for 50% of your max health. Sounds familiar? That's because it is familiar. It used to be part of a trait in your artifact and has a 30-second reduced cooldown. So you're getting a reduction in cooldown, I believe, down to about 90 seconds on Dispersion, 50% max health heal, which is very, very good. It's going to be placed on tier 30 and up against Body and Soul and Sandlin. Kind of tough being up against Body and Soul, and Mania will be removed, which is what gave you a speed boost based on your Insanity. Going to be some tough choices, some interesting choices, but it's even though the choices are tough, you don't feel like you're losing something or sacrificing something, and that's because of a new PvP talent we're going to talk about in a few minutes. Legacy of the Void. Void Eruption's cast time is reduced by 40% and may be cast anytime your Insanity is 60 or higher, plus Void Form. This is interesting. Plus Void Form receives 5% additional damage. That's a total of a 25% damage boost with this particular talent, Legacy of the Void. That's pretty huge. That is pretty huge because now you're going to have abilities that are going to be generating some Insanity while you're in Void Form that weren't there before. We're going to get to that right here now. Void Torrent. Channel a torrent of void energy into the target, dealing shadow damage over 4 seconds. Pretty decent amount of shadow damage, by the way. Insanity does not drain during this channel, which is nothing new, but now also generates 30 Insanity over the duration. An earlier version on the PTR allowed you to cast Void Torrent without being in Void form. They changed it. I simply point that out so people can keep in mind that things can still change, things still might change. This is one example of it. You're able to, if you took the talent Void Torrent, you're able to use it while out of Void form, but now currently, as it is on the PTR and on Wowhead, you have to be in Void form. Surrender to Madness. All your Insanity generating abilities generate 100% more Insanity, which would be interesting because that means Void Torrent's going to generate 60 Insanity and really put you in a situation you're going to be able to walk while you're using Insanity. So it's like a Mind Flay without the slow, multiplied damage, but you're going to be able to walk while you're using it, and it's going to give you 60 Insanity, keep you in Void form. Really, really, really drastic change. Of course, what am I saying? These are going to be on the same tier, so it's either one or the other, but you get the point. You're going to be able to use Surrender to Madness with greater efficiency. You're still going to take 90% damage of your maximum health, but the penalty where you can't generate Insanity for 30 seconds after this expires is going to be dropped down to 15 seconds, and the cooldown has been reduced from 4 minutes to 3 minutes. When you add in that new talent for Dispersion that heals you 50%, and the fact that Dispersion is going to reduce more damage, this is actually viable. This is actually viable. You don't have to hit it on the mark to get it right. It's going to make some very, very interesting gameplay here. And now we're going to get into the PvP talents Edge of Insanity. While you're at 90 Insanity and not in Blade form, you take 20% less damage and increase damage dealt by 10%. That's what it was. I believe you're going to be chopped down to 10% less damage and 10% of a damage increase while not in Void form. And it's going to be on a 15-second duration, which I don't know how that works. I don't know if it's going to reset every 15 seconds if you're above 90. I don't know if you got to drop below 90 in order to reset it. Kind of hard to test it in PvP, and it's still a work in progress, but the fact is, combined with Focus Will, this can give you up to a 25, maybe even a 40% damage reduction, probably 25%. I don't think that Focus Will is going to end up stacking 2 times. That'd be just a bit much, especially with this talent out there. Greater Fade, a new PvP talent for Shadow, was something that Holy Priest had in the past, still have, by the way. Greater Fade increases your movement speed by 50%. Incidentally, if you're a Worgen, it stacks, so it's a 90% movement speed. Pretty damn cool. And it causes most melee, ranged, and spells to miss you. So if a Warlock is ramping up on a Chaos Bolt, you can pop this, and there's a good chance it's going to completely miss you. Same thing, you don't have your silence up, and all of a sudden some Fire Mage is popping his Greater Pyroblast. The reality is you could time it so that it misses you. Any big damage you see coming your way, Paladin pops his wings and he's in bubble form and you can't really see him. Greater Fade is really going to be your best friend. This is going to last 4 seconds or until you take some kind of hostile action. Now, I would think that there might be a little bit of a problem here because hostile action, does that include your dots? Theoretically, it probably doesn't, but I can see how something like this could be bugged to start because you might pop it and your dots are doing damage. Maybe you have a Shadow Fiend out there doing damage. Is that considered a hostile action even though you hit those actions prior to hitting Greater Fade? I'm not saying it's a problem. I'm saying it's a potential problem. It's a potential bug. And we all know with Blizzard, sometimes they get right on bugs, they fix them right away. Sometimes they last 10 years. Greater Fade has a 45-second cooldown. Now we're going to talk about Pure Shadow. Dispersion reduces the damage taken by an additional 20% and causes Void form not to drain Insanity for an additional 6 seconds after Dispersion ends. That gives your Dispersion a 95% damage reduction with the talent Intangibility. This is pretty huge. Like I said, now you're in a situation where if you take Intangibility and you take Pure Shadow, the reality is you're in a position where you can take Surrender to Madness and not worry about killing yourself. Now, to sum all this up, tanky, Shadow Priests are going to be very tanky going forward. This is a different playstyle than I feel comfortable with, but that's subjective. As a range player, whether I'm playing a Hunter, Warlock, Shadow Priest, I like to be able to place distance between myself and the target because the reality is if they're chasing you, that means they're not DPSing you. Plus, with a little bit of trickery, maybe you could fool them and it's going to take some time for them to even find you. That's why I love Spectral Guise so much. It offered creativity, it was innovative, and you were able to fake out a lot of melee with it most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time, and I sorely miss that. But that doesn't mean that this style is not viable. It's just different. You're going to be a Timex watch, you're going to stand there, you're going to take a licking, and you're going to keep on dotting. You're going to have to learn how to juke targets. You're going to duke it out so you could juke it out, and dots running on a target, keep in mind, we got a 20% increase in damage on our dots and a little bit of increase on Mind Flay, I believe 10%, and Mind Shear. So overall, the reality is you're going to be a tank in some ways here, especially if you're getting 2 stacks of Focused Will, which I don't think is going to be the case. But nonetheless, when you consider the damage reduction, the extra damage reduction you're getting with Dispersion, the heal that you used to get in Legion, now you're getting it in BFA, and a shorter cooldown. This is going to be a very different playstyle. It's going to be a very good playstyle, and you're going to be able to use your utility, such as your disease removals, mass dispel, regular dispel, offensive dispel. I think even Leap of Faith and your Absorb Shield is going to be able to generate insanity. So it's going to encourage you to use that utility on yourself and other players because it's going to generate insanity. And the question is, I'm really curious to see how Mass Dispel works with this, because is it going to generate 6 insanity for every single magic effect that you dispel? Or is it just the one use, you get 6 for a Mass Dispel? When you consider the amount of mana that you use, it could go either way here. I really don't know, and I'm not going to wait 2 freaking hours in the queue to get into a BG to test it out. But these are all questions that we need to ask ourselves, and these are things that we need to be on the look for. Now, I'm going to go into greater detail when I release the 8.1 Tides of Vengeance Shadow Priest Guide, which is going to be long. It's going to be detailed. It's going to be comprehensive. And we're going to talk about putting together synergy with Azerite armor, putting together synergy with regular talents, PvP talents, how they're going to work together and how you're going to maximize it. But I don't really want to get into that because I still believe right here and now we haven't gotten an update to our Azerite armor, some new stuff. Other classes have gotten it. I believe that's on the way, so I want to be thorough with that when it comes out. And I also, quite frankly, want you guys to subscribe and come back for that 8.1 guide. It's going to be worth it. The #1 performing video on my channel has been a Shadow Priest guide from WAD, and I got to think about guides, and I think it's going to be great, and I want you guys to experience it. My name is Luxeley. Thank you for watching, and whatever it is by you, whether it's morning, afternoon, or night, make it epic.